Okay. I suppose there's a joke in me taking off a mask right before a title called the SuperSpreader gem. So, anyway, I'm Ben Oakes from Doximity, and I'm going to be talking about an open source project that we just open sourced. So, it's called SuperSpreader. It's a gem extracted from Doximity. It's originally part of our dialer product. It was originally written in 2020 to handle a massive backfill I needed to work on. And I'm just going to give a little context. Doximity. We're professional network for physicians. In short, your doctor uses Doximity instead of LinkedIn. That's an easy way to describe it. And Dialer is, we call it a mobile medical office for doctors. Doctors can call, text, and video call their patients. And it's been especially popular since 2020, as you might have imagined. So it looks like this. If you want to find out more, there's a link down there. So we love Ruby on Rails. We're one of the founding members of the Rails Foundation. There are quite a few doxers in the audience. You can talk to me or one of the others. Some hands are going up, I see. So if you'd like to hear more. This was yesterday at Rails World, and I just think it's awesome seeing DHH in front of a slide with our name on it. So, all right, SuperSpreader. So what does it do? It performs massive memory and compute-efficient backfills of active record models using active job like Sidekick or whatever you want to run it on, and Redis. It was originally written to re-encrypt the dialer database, which contained millions upon millions of records to re-encrypt. Without SuperSpreader, it would have taken months, like many months, to re-encrypt. Using KMS, it takes 11 milliseconds per record, which is just how a key management service works on purpose to guard access to the data. With SuperSpreader, it was able to complete in just a couple of weeks, and it spreads out the work in a super way. So, all right, so it's originally built for backfills. If you need to touch every model in a table with Ruby land logic and you have a lot of records, it makes sense. But like, be careful when you pick it up. Like, think about whether a rake task makes sense or a migration. You know, we found some uses for it, but it's not something you should always be reaching for. But if you have a lot of Ruby land logic that would take a long time to run in sequence, consider SuperSpreader. There are some limitations. You need an auto-incrementing key. There's more stuff in the README. Some of it still has a rough developer experience because I just basically wrote it for myself. And it was just open source, so scratch your own itch. You can contribute to it if you'd like. How do you use it? You make a job. Here's one called example backfill job. Give it a model class to look at. This one's called example model. And then you give it a method that takes a begin ID and an end ID. And you can put whatever you want in that method. So here's an example of what you might put in there. You might take the models between begin and end, and then do some expensive calculation on each one of those, and then do an import to save all of them all at once. So like this might be like something that takes 50 milliseconds for each one or something like that. An assumption here is that only the older records need to be backfilled. So the idea is that your model is front filling using that expensive calculation going forward, so you're just going back, and you can, of course, exclude records if you need to. So to run it, you configure the scheduler, then invoke the scheduler. Again, DevX is, there's not a UI beyond the Rails console, so yeah, you just go in and you decide how parallel you want to make it, how many jobs you want to run at any given time. So you make a scheduler config and you set the batch size, duration, what job you're running and stuff like that. You can even set it to run more at night because fewer people using the app, you can just run more transactions at a time. And then you just save it and you invoke it. So you tell the scheduler to go, and it runs in parallel using as many jobs as you want. It starts at the most recent record, works its way all the way down to 1, and you can even tune the rate while it's running. You just resave the configuration. So there's some limits, based on how big your database is or something, but you can set it to be whatever you want. So here's just an example of how it works. It'll run a scheduler, queue a bunch of jobs, counting down, and 3 seconds later, it'll run another scheduler, more jobs, another scheduler, more jobs, oops. And then after 2 weeks, you're finally getting down to the last segment, and then you get all the way down to 1, and it stops. And then at that point, you can delete the backfill, and it has redone everything that you needed it to do. It can be used for more than backfills, be creative. And that was it. If you have questions about it, come find me.
Okay, timer starts now. So hello, my name is Melony Franchini, or Mel for short. And oh, how appropriate it is that I'm second to in line, because this talk is about the first follower. So this is a TED Talk given way back in 2010. It's an oldie but a goodie, less than 3 minutes. I highly recommend you watch it when you have the time. He describes a music festival and how a movement gets started. There's always first a leader, a lone nut who's just off wildly dancing. They follow, they continue to watch, and there's the first follower. They show up, they dance, now there's two. So maybe that lone nut is onto something. That first follower waves over a buddy, and now we've got three. Three's a crowd, more people come over, the momentum gets started. It continues to build. People are running across the music festival to get to this dance party, and by the end, everyone is standing dancing, and it was all due to that lone nut. And the lone nut's the one that's going to get remembered for this, right? He's that leader, the CEO, the founder. But actually, if you look closer, it's that first follower who transformed the lone nut into a leader. And so I know you're thinking like, great, Mel, I know what to do next time at a music festival, thanks. But what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with software engineering? And I was talking to a new acquaintance yesterday, and one example is, maybe there's one person working on a corner of the application that no one really wants to touch, but everyone's like, yeah, we should get to that. Another person may join them, and then people start paying attention, and then at some point down the road, it might become an essential part of an application. For those of you here today, possibly think about who might think that they're not good at networking or a little bit shy. Well, if you see someone you know talking to someone you don't know, gather that courage and go listen in on the conversation, or even maybe join the conversation. And even yesterday, there were many examples of projects that look very overwhelming at first glance. And we often ask, the team leader or the manager, how are you going to get your team on board? How are you going to motivate them? But what I think we should do is turn to the team and say, who's going to have the courage to stand up and be that first person who actively participates? Who's going to show everyone else how to actively participate? That's the first follower. And so I think what I would like to leave you with today is the challenge of expanding your definition of leadership to include that first follower and to include leadership through followership, especially and to recognize and acknowledge that when you see a possible new hire walk through your doors, or when you see a colleague or a peer working really hard on something. Everyone likes to be noticed for their hard work. And especially when you see it in yourself. This is value you're adding to your company and to your team that often goes unrecognized, and you can bring that to your performance review that comes up at the end of the year. I know for some of you, that's soon. And so, without this form of leadership, we would all just be a bunch of lone nuts sitting on our computers. But together, we can create some really great things. Thank you.
Okay, so apparently my handwriting is really bad, so when I wrote on the giant Post-it, it looked like I said I was going to talk about how to boil water. Super interesting topic, not one I'm qualified to talk about. Instead, something I'm super qualified to talk about, building broken gems. I'm Samuel Giddins. I'm the security lead of Ruby Gems and sort of work for Ruby Central these days. This is going to be a fun, fast story, so stick with me. So, what is a gem? Hands up if you've built a gem like this before. Gem build something. Great. Like all of you have done that, even if you think you haven't. I promise you, if you've run rake release on a gem or something like that, you've built a gem. It's gone like this. You give it a gem spec, you say gem build, successfully built. Great. What's in that .gem that gets built? Well, it's a tarball. And if we list that tarball, we can see it's got 3 files in it. It's got a metadata gzip, it's got a data tar.gz, and it's got checksums.gz. So yeah, it's like, it's gzips all the way down. So, okay, what's in that metadata file? If we extract it and unzip it, it's YAML, everyone's favorite. So this is sort of an abbreviated version of what the Rails gem spec looks like inside of the Rails gem. Notice it's YAML and not Ruby. But yeah, Sam, you're a security engineer. What's this got to do with that? Unfortunately, indeed I am at this point. So let's package our own gem. So here's a short snippet of code that I stole out of the rubygems.org test suite this morning. We can create a tarball and add some gzipped files to it, and we can call that a gem. And we can put our own gem spec in there. Nothing says we have to use gem build in a real gem spec. We can cheat and say, hey, we've got our gem specification here, and we've, instead of saying it's an object, we're saying it's a hash with ivars. And this could be pretty bad to install, because if we load that gem spec, note, do not actually ever use YAML unsafe load. I shouldn't have to say this, it says unsafe, saying it anyway to be safe. So yeah, could be pretty bad if someone were to install this and maybe like overwrite your passwords or something like that, get you to run arbitrary code. And you could push it to rubygems.org, except there was a problem saving your gem. Oh, yeah, sweet, I fixed this bug. So earlier this summer, it's not summer anymore, this summer, published a CVE that basically allowed people to push broken gems like that to rubygems.org. Fortunately, no one exploited it. I found the bug, I fixed it, all's well that ends well. But yeah, possible to build broken gems, and wasn't that fun. So if you want me to keep on finding and fixing these bugs in the ecosystem before, malicious actors do, support your local Ruby Central.
Okay, so first of all, immutability. We'll get to that in 2 slides, there's only 4. Let's write a service object that does some work, not real work, that's for Monday. This is some fake work though. There's a foo doer class and a bar class that it's gonna call, and it does some stuff. You can read that, but don't bother, it's not important. It does the thing. Let's go to a version that does more of the thing though, because that's more realistic. It handles the errors and exposes them because something is calling foodoer2 and cares if it fails. That's already a little awkward. I've probably written that class at some point. It looks familiar anyway. But this was supposed to be about immutability, and there's still none of that here. So let's go to 3. Okay, first of all, the gem called memory adds a memoization, I guess, decorator, sort of the successor to the memoist gem. And that's what this thing here is. It also works on methods that have signatures, but I didn't use any. And I usually don't, because of this pattern that I wanted to evangelize a little. Here is a class that does the exact same thing as foodoer2, but does it in a immutable style. That's what I call this style. This is a class that does the work and exposes the errors, but all of its methods are nouns, and all of those nouns are memoized. And as a result, looking at this, that none of these methods ever return a different value when you call them. So you don't have to worry about side effects, because if you try to call any of these methods, and some of them are private, you don't have to worry about how they're going about doing their work aside from the first time you understand them. And that's important if, like me, you have trouble holding very many things in your head at the same time. In particular, everything in almost every class I write is consistent and immutable. I guess I said most of that already. I don't use the memoize keyword as a performance optimization most of the time. You can treat it instead as an annotation that means this thing doesn't change its value. And knowing that about a piece of code lets you reason about it a lot easier. I have another piece of code to show you next that'll make that clearer. Let's go ahead. None of us know what that does. That you could, if I had written something that actually did anything meaningful and given it names of methods that meant things, you could read the names and reason about what it did, but you'd be trusting the names, you wouldn't be able to tell what it did. And the reason for that is that all of these things are mutating and examining mutated state. In order to figure out what's going on in here, you have to simulate the state of the class through time. You have to reason about what's going on and keep track of it, and then reason about a sequence of events, behaviors, continuous state as it changes. In this version, which is obviously a different thing, it makes more sense, so the fact that it's easier to understand shouldn't be a surprise, that's unrelated. But it's also easier to understand because it is immutable. Because none of the things in here change, you don't have to simulate it in order to understand what's going on. I've seen many, many classes that ought to have made sense, as much as this one does, but don't, because all over the place, they have state. Not just have state, they change state. They update instance variables as the result of performing actions inside a method like, I think it was in the first one. No, it was the second one. Like in here, we're updating the errors array, we're updating the outcomes, we're changing those things. If this were added to over a course of 2 years, ended up a 300-line class, that's not an absurdly sized class for a service operation. Refactored a couple times, we'd end up with methods that had state updates down in the private section. Pieces of this run method would be decomposed. You'd end up not being able to tell unless you understood the full contents of foo doer 2. You wouldn't be able to tell exactly, 5 minutes, sorry. I think you got the point anyway.
I want to say thank you, Marc, for the great talk about Packwork yesterday. In fact, thank you, Spike, volunteers, speakers, eTown Hall. Thank you very much for putting this on. This talk is called the reference section. Oh wait, I was going to post this in Slack so you don't have to take notes. So this talk is called the reference section to Marc's talk. But why would you do a reference section to a talk? Talks don't include that kind of detail because you can go look that up later. So this is the excited reference section, which just means I'm talking fast, with extensions and some explorations to Marc's talk. Hi, I'm Stephan. I work at Gusto, and we use Packwork too. Again, no notes needed. I just put this in Slack. Gusto built a bunch of tools around Packwork, and I want to do a quick reference to all the things that Marc was saying yesterday and the stuff that is also out there. He was talking about documenting of APIs. He was talking also a lot about shit lists. It turns out you can make undocumented APIs another shit list. He was talking about return types. Active record spreading around everywhere is dangerous. You can make that a shit list. Namespaces in packs, we're talking about how you find which queries come from where. Shit list. He was drawing these boxes that you could very well think of as architectural layers. Shit list. He was talking about which team owns what. That's also in this, in all these links. You can, basically it's a code ownership gem that does a lot more around the kind of classic GitHub file. Events pops up, very important topic. Yeah, we got nothing yet, really. Might be an interesting thing to contribute to. Other communities have something. This one is Java, but we don't have anything yet. And there's also VS Code extensions for Packwork and for this ownership stuff. There's visualization tools so you can present the structure of your packages. A danger plugin if you want to give feedback on PRs. A metrics emitter for Datadog. You kind of actually don't need Packwork anymore. There's like a Pax built in Rust that's 10 times faster. For the next one, I feel a little bit like this guy because I'm writing a book about this stuff. Is Drew here? Please tell me Drew's here. So there's a discount code. You can get this book for, well, we all know what this is. This is Good Ruby. And then when you output that, as you all know. Yeah, that's right. Right? You get that for $10, and you can see that I'm not lying because it says IRB in the bottom left there. But weirdly, I think something shot on my screen here. There's also a Ruby Rails modularity Slack where a bunch of folks talk about all this stuff. This link is the most heinous one, I promise. So if you were like yesterday, my app is smaller, I don't need all this stuff. This was never relevant to me. I actually wanted to, this is not what I actually wanted to talk about, because as I said, I work at Gusto, and thanks for the reference. We're in performance review season right now, and my self-reflection is due in about 4 hours. I'm almost done, for real. I mean, I promise. Don't do it like me. Instead, do what I say, not what I do. Here's a couple tips on how to crush your self-reflection. Know what you're being evaluated against for your level. If that's not written up, ask. Get clarity on what that is. Get examples, get descriptions of the kind of scope, the behavior, the work, or impact that's expected of you. Regularly ask how you're doing against that, right? Get the feedback early. Keep a wins diary is a very simple way to not forget stuff, because then you can go back and read it. And then get feedback on that too, and share it so that you can get that feedback. That is, in fact, almost your self-reflection. And then you can go crush that. Bonus points, give someone else feedback so they can crush their self-reflection. Thanks so much.
All right. Hi, my name is Blake. Find me on GitHub. I'm going to talk about Makefiles, which is something I wasn't aware of until about a year and a half ago. So have you ever done any of the following things? Because I've done all of them. I don't know how to get this pop-up off down here, but have you ever scrolled endlessly to find a command that someone shared with you on onboarding, probably to help you get started? Copy-pasted a command from a README that just didn't work, and it was like the command, like the main command at the top of the README. Have you ever made your own handy or convenient commands for a specific project that maybe does one or two things for you at once that you do a lot? Or have you ever not been able to run something locally that you did yesterday and you're like, is that just my machine, or is it like something pushed, or I don't know. So the first step, if you ever have any of these problems, is to try and source control the commands that you all use. So hopefully in your README you already have commands, and maybe even a getting started markdown file. And the second step I'd recommend, because a README, depending on how complicated the project is, can get kind of hard to parse, is to create a Makefile. And there are similar technologies. The one you're probably most familiar with is package.json scripts. And a Makefile is like dead simple to read. It kind of looks like a YAML file, and it has no file extension, so it's just Makefile, and you'd put it in the root of your project. And then you can do any sort of command that you would normally do. You can have them call each other. You can pass in optional parameters. It's really simple to glance through, look at, and there's a number of things. So you can already do this. You don't have to install anything. It comes with the GNU compiler collection, which I just learned today. So it's already on your Mac. It's easy to read. Everything's in one spot. As I mentioned, you can have commands call each other. And it's easier to talk about, right? So if you can't run something locally, the first question you ask is like, well, what'd you try? You know, did you drop the database, et cetera? You can say, well, I ran make down, make reset, and they can know what you mean. You can get on the same page really quickly. And you can leave comments in it, and it's really easy to transition your team over to something new, besides just like updating your CI, which is kind of a lot of times the place where you would enforce new things in your project. So we actually had, at my last company, we had a manager transition us. We were launching Docker. We were running Docker locally, and they were able to change out the container that we're running and how we were running it across the whole team, because he just had to update the Makefile. And then we were all running the same thing when he merged that into the main branch. And that's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
This is the slide-free talk. How many people are local in the Boulder front? All right, that's awesome. You're loco, that's also acceptable, that's fine. How many of you have ever been to Dojo 4 on a Wednesday morning? All right, almost half, that's good. Well, some of you may know if you're on LinkedIn, we're actually closing down the Dojo 4 consultancy, so that's one thing. But the other thing is actually the community that's been around Dojo 4 for a long time. And one of them is Code and Coffee. We need to find a new place to have it because we're probably gonna not be at that location anymore. So I'm looking for places where we can have Wednesday morning Code and Coffee. I've got a couple ideas, but please hit me up. One of them is possibly the new Southside Cafe, or not Southside Cafe, but Boxcar Southside. They're gonna be opening up hopefully in the next few months. That might be one. And any other options? We're looking to have Code and Coffee because Code and Coffee has been an integral portion of the Ruby community in the Front Range for a long time. So we want to keep it going. Yep.